You're listening to Parasearch UK Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch UK Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to The Spirit Dimension with your host, Kerry Greenaway, right here on Parasearch Radio.
A good evening and welcome to The Spirit Dimension. My name is Kerry Greenaway, and as always on a Sunday I like to bring you something a little bit different, and tonight is no different to that. In the studio tonight I am joined by one of the most forerunners in parapsychology, research, author, so many accolades to this man's name. He's on the council of the SPR and he's a speaker at this year's Sage Paracon. This is Dr Callum Cooper. Good evening, Cal. How are you?
I'm very well, Kerry. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. So the last time, I know, I'm very well. The last time I spoke to you, now stop it, behave yourself. Make me blush already. The last time we spoke to you, which is an interview we've done that was well listened to, was you were talking about the progression. I'm jumping straight into it, you know it is. I'm not mucking about here.
Yeah, to be continued.
Yeah, to be continued. Was a progression from the Gansfeld experiment into the flotation tank experiment that you did, or that you were doing, but you were still right in the midst of that, weren't you? So can you tell me what's happened since then on that one? Because I'm dying to know.
Yeah, so let's go back to why it happened in the first place. I mean, you've said there that it's a progression from the Gansfeld. It is, and it isn't. It isn't because the idea of using the flotation tanks was presented a short while before the Gansfeld was even introduced. So if you go back through the proceedings of the Parapsychological Association, that's been going for a long time. It was what represented Duke University's research output, and the Parapsychological Association in the 1960s were recognised as an affiliate of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. So they're an official body of that as well. I'm still going to this day. Recently had their conference, and every year that they have all kinds of invited speakers as well as general papers that are being presented as conferences do, and they will have a guest dinner speaker as well. And in 1969, when they had their conference in New York City, they had Dr. John Lilly giving a talk. It was a philosopher, a neuroscientist. He was also interested in psychoanalysis as well. He had been experimenting with sensory deprivation in the 1950s through medical institutes, and he was doing this with several colleagues. One of them, Peter Sufeld, who's still supporting flotation tank conferences to this day that are run every year. But both of them went in kind of separate directions of their research. What Lilly was proposing was that because he'd spent this time in sensory isolation himself and from listening to the reports of others, people would see shapes, visions inside the tanks, they'd interact with things. And he said, to the PA convention, he said, why don't you kind of use this imagery? You could actually test where it's coming from. Is it an internal thing and we're just making it up? It varies depending on the individual's creativity and what they've been doing day to day and their troubles. Or if you focus on something specific, does it relate to a target? So you could use it as an extrasensory perception test. So what do these tanks involve? When he was using them in the 1950s, it was full submersion when they started. The person would be completely under the water and they would have a breathing mask. So if you've seen the film Altered States from 1980, which was based on this research, the film starts off with a guy in more or less a diving bell suit helmet, and he's fully submerged in a tank of water. It's suspended, and he's just got that helmet in which to breathe. And then the tanks were developed further to allow people to float. So it gives them this complete sense of freeness. It might create the sense of an out-of-body experience as well. And that's due to putting magnesium sulfate into the water, so much so that you float. So if anyone's ever been to the Dead Sea, you've had that experience naturally of the salt content in the water being so high that you float. That's what happens inside these tanks. And it's the body temperature, so you don't feel hot, you don't feel cold, you just feel perfectly comfortable. And
like
you typically
a womb-like experience.
Well, yeah, and people will report perinatal experiences inside the tank. So this feeling of being reborn while they're actually in there, because you're typically in there naked. You're showered beforehand and you go in, and it helps create this sense of complete freeness. You haven't got any swimming costumes or anything like that, fabric, textiles, touching the body throughout the flotation, because if you're starting to enter an altered state of consciousness, typically this hypnagogic state, which is what we think when you're going to sleep, but you're not quite there. We're sort of hovering between sleep and awake. That's where we want someone to be. And if someone pokes you or prods you, or if you even drift to the side of the tank and touch it, that will jolt you back to your state of awareness, and you'll have to relax again and maybe move position. But it doesn't matter how you lay down, cross-legged, you've got your legs spread apart, you've got your hands behind your head, you're not going to sink. It doesn't matter what shape, weight, size someone is, because the salt content you can float. So that's the scenario. Lily proposed it, and it appears no one really did anything about it. It was around about 1974. They'd been practicing with different versions of sensory deprivation in the lab. One was called the witch's cradle, where someone was suspended upright. They tested that at the Maimonides Medical Center, where they'd done dream telepathy tests. But the Ganzfeld was much more simple, easy to run for people to set up as well at various different universities, done hundreds of times over. There are many studies where they've done meta-analyses because the amount of studies, that's where you take all these studies together that all did the same thing, and those that found nothing and those that did, and you look at the overall significance, how big is the effect of actually finding something within it. And the Ganzfeld allows you to lie in a reclining chair, eye shields on, you've got your eyes open under the eye shields, a red light shining down, very calming. It's like being lay on the beach with your eyes shut but in the direction of the sun, so you've got this pink haze. And you listen to some relaxation music and headphones for about 10-15 minutes, and then you've got 40 minutes of this reduced white noise. So it's like a very calming hiss, and it's okay to listen to. It's like very fast flowing water, and that's when you start to have sounds, visions all coming to you, and you say it out loud. So we've gone right over that and decided, well, no one actually tried out the tanks, except for one study in the 1980s by D. Scott Rogo. It's just a tiny pilot study, had three participants, 4 trial runs, and it didn't really find anything or any qualitative matters. And he highlighted all the errors in the method and why it wasn't working well and why the participants weren't comfortable. We've taken that on board, and because there's a lot of ethics to go through and things like that, it's just been myself and Dr. David Saunders at the University of Northampton, with Dr. Glenn Hitchman as well, who leads our research department, doing all the judging and scoring. We've tested ourselves, essentially, so we could take Rogo's issues with the methods and ethics forward, look for them ourselves to see how would this work if we've got a number of people coming into the tanks, or they're trying to send information from one tank to the other, and also on our first trial run, have we got any good scores going on? So that, I know that's really long-winded, but that's where we were and where we are now. So that's bringing us back to what I was talking about before and what the study is that we've done. We've been trying to get someone to look at a video clip, and while I'm in the tank, when I come out, all the visions and drawings that I do they relate to that particular clip against the decoys? So there's one clip and 3 decoys every time. Hope that makes sense.
It does, yeah, total sense to me. So you have come to the end of the experimentation phase, and you're now analysing the results phase.
Yeah. Yes.
What can you tell me about that?
Well, not very much.
Oh.
what we did, we had Dr. Hickman judging, being an independent judge. So he looked at all the drawings and the writing and all the clips, not knowing which one was the target. And he had to rank order out of, 1 being the best, 4 being the worst, which one he thought was the target based on the mentations. And then we thought, well, just to increase the comparison, the statistics, you can have a look. I will judge it as well, because I don't know what the targets are. So I'll be seeing the clips for the first time, knowing that watching them, and see if I get any familiarity with them, or see if those drawings make sense to me again. Because we started this in May of 2016, and it was only 12 trials. I think I got 3 hits out of 12, and Glenn got 4 hits out of 12, based on what the mentations that I'd given. So mine was on chance. His was just on that border of chance as well, just like slightly on the more positive side of things. But even the second, maybe third trial in, we'd already spotted some errors that we thought this is really going to be quite detrimental to the overall feedback. So I can explain what those were. When we recently redid a dream ESP study, there was no limit to what we could actually keep waking up and writing about to then bring in that information and compare it against the clips. We were using a similar system of using these clips to look at, to see if they went into our dreams somehow. With the tank, I'm floating in there for an hour, and I have 10 minutes of relaxation music, and then 5 minutes at the end to tell me that my time's up. They've really only got that 45-minute period of drifting in and out and having this altered state. And we realised that, I'd come out with some really interesting information, some great drawings as well. But all I'm doing is trying to remember within that time the most significant things that happened. I knew that I'd have periods of just thinking about a day-to-day thing, or maybe actually seeing in my field of vision something, or hearing something. And because it's not as significant as whatever I'm actually looking at, be it some sort of disaster happening in front of me, or animals doing something, or sharks swimming around, or seeing someone walking through New York City, all the way through to sexual things as well. It could be a variety, and you don't know what the targets are going to be. So you've got to be really open about what you're seeing in there. We're missing a lot of information, because I'm only remembering the most significant things when I come out the tank. And that's where Rogo had got a little bit better. He'd rigged an intercom system. So while someone was in the tank, they could just speak out loud and he could hear everything they were saying. And they'd used that system in early Gansfeld as well. The problem was with his participants, they said nothing at all. They'd never tried flotation tanks before. So they were so in awe of the environment that they were in and having these altered states, they didn't think to open their mouths and actually say anything. The only participant that did had previously tried out Gansfeld. So they knew what an altered state was like and going through this kind of procedure. So we needed something like that. So that's one thing to rectify as we move forward. We need to suspend a dictaphone or have an intercom system set up. So if the person has experienced something even minor, they can just murmur it, say it out loud. So besides their drawings and their writing, we also have this recording to transcribe as well, to support the rest of their feedback. Because we think we're losing so much data on each trial run just because it's such an unusual environment to be in.
It would also bring in a huge psychological effect, wasn't it? I mean, that's one of your areas of main study, isn't it? Is psychology, where you're bringing forward information that you haven't even recognised that you remember.
It could be. I mean, you could be just thinking day to day or going back to past memories. But it could be a combination of, gibberish that you've had throughout the day and a film that you saw the night before. And this is why we're trying to take what Lily said and take it that step further. He said, it could just be past memories of your own life. It could be day-to-day things. It could be your own creativity. I mean, if we, decided to do dead air right now and just have 5 minutes of not saying anything on radio and just sit with our thoughts, you and I could both do that. Start to think a number of things and then tell each other what we've been thinking.
Oh, maybe not.
Maybe not. But does that necessarily mean it's ESP? No.
Sorry.
It just means we're capable of sitting and thinking about things. The way to take that forward and say, well, are we capable of focusing on something and having that information come to us, is to actually have that target scenario. So here's the target. This is what another person who was thinking about you at the time was watching. Have you actually matched up to that? And there are some decoys as well for the judge, so that the judge has to really find some justified links between what you're saying and what you're drawing, and then what they're watching. Because they've got 4 very detailed clips. They've got to look at all the elements. Is it in colour or is it in black and white? Does it involve people or are there no people? Are there animals or no animals? Is there water or isn't there? All these kinds of elements you could start to put into binary. But yeah, we've got so much psychology really to dabble with. But they were saying this a long time ago, even back in the 1920s, when they were starting to do some really nice formal lab studies of telepathy. And they were just trying to separate human creativity from ESP. And since then, there's been some fantastic studies that have looked at correlations between people that believe in the paranormal and say they have quite a number of frequent paranormal experiences and human creativity. I think Dr. Nicola Holt-Hutchinson, who's at the University of West England, that's been the main focus of her research, really. She's fascinated with anomalous experiences in human creativity. So there's a lot of scope for that area.
Wow, it's absolutely fascinating, the research that you're doing in this way. How much of this, I've been reading recently a little bit about cross-correspondence in regards to ESP and medium work and stuff like that. This kind of links into that a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, I suppose so, in a way. With that, you've got a different scenario in that what we're trying to do and what the Gansfelds have always done, and the lab studies that I mentioned, is they've just taken either the researcher or any Joe Bloggs off the street and said, here's a study that we believe that the methods are so good, it can't be fraud, it can't be cheating. We believe that if you are going to score well in this, that it could only be down to ESP, that we've characterized from day-to-day examples of what seems to be ESP. With the cross-correspondence, you have people claiming to be mediums and with the ability to get in contact with the dead, that are trying to communicate information kind of transatlantically, but also via spirit as well. And you've got psychical researchers on both sides of the pond trying to actually keep track of this correspondence as it goes back and forth as well. So, it was a really big noted study because of, A, how old it was, and the fact that it was all postal correspondence then to kind of keep up to date with how the study was progressing. And it was a very early way of trying to test, well, are these mediums just coming out with what we would expect of cold reading and Barnum effect, which wasn't fully understood then. To be honest, the only main researcher that ever looked into that has done full-on formal studies of it was my own colleague and former supervisor, Professor Chris Lowe, at the University of Northampton. His thesis was looking at the cold reading effect. And it's surprising how much we talk about that and Barnum effect, and there's so few studies actually on it. But it's very evident and it's very kind of easy to adopt. What they were looking at was what kind of information are they picking up on that they shouldn't otherwise know about because of how specific it is and how you would need to have access to that information, how specific it is to the knowledge of that deceased person, and so on. So beyond, they're saying that Auntie Mary passed away and she had lower back pain, didn't she? She'd always get up out of a chair and have pain in her lower back. Well, how many people do we know that do have lower back pain? How many people do we know that passed away from heart conditions or cancer? It's too general, I'm afraid. What we need is some really specific information to make us think, well, how would that person have known about that? Or is it just a very, very good stab in the dark? How many times did they say that specific piece of information to other people? And that person says, no, you're absolutely wrong. That means nothing to me. So, yeah, I can see where you're getting at with the similarities to the cross-correspondence. But today, contrary to what most people think, we don't test psychics. The closest we've got is recently we formed an affiliation a bit more with the Arthur Findlay College at Stansted Hall. Yeah. And the University of Northampton has its own laboratory there that's been going for about a year. It's had a few different funding sources to get it running. And our main focus of research there is neuroscience. So we're looking at mediumship from a neuroscientific perspective and looking at brainwave activity whenever they are trying to give a demonstration to see, well, what significant shifts are actually happening while they're doing that. So that's really our advancement, and actually going to a place where mediums train to do what they do and we can actually test them on site. But in the university, we've always just taken people off the street and said, have a go at this.
There's a very distinct difference when you've got someone training to do mediumship and just like a Joe Bloggs off the street. There's a very distinct difference, isn't there? Because somebody's obviously a lot more open-minded or have had experiences which has led them down that pathway to someone just having a go.
Yeah, and we get a variety of people, which is why sometimes when we send them into testing, we might give them a paranormal belief scale. So we know that we've got an absolute cynic through to a skeptic, someone that's open-minded, or an absolute believer. You can say anything, they will accept it without question. So it's interesting to look at also at how they score. Which, interestingly enough, if you've got an absolute paranormal believer in terms of how they score on some of those paranormal belief scales, they tend to do better anyway in the ESP study because they're so open to those experiences. It has shown a definite correlation that they will do better and maybe show a significant effect compared to the skeptic or the cynic that aren't so open-minded to it, and they either get chance or uniquely are so against it that they create what's called psi-missing effect, and they get a significant effect, but so badly below chance that it's significant, if that makes sense. It's like they're actually deflecting doing well. So they haven't even scored chance. They've gone way below what chance would expect.
Because they blocked that experience initially.
Well, seemingly, that's has been one of the arguments for why the statistics would come out like that for someone who's on that extreme end of the scale compared to the other extreme end of the scale, whereas just the open-minded person who says, well, I've had a few telepathic experiences, but I've never seen a ghost, and I'm always skeptical of this, and I always question it. They might be right in the middle, and they just keep on getting chance.
So how are you recording this? Are you looking at MRI machines or EEG machines? What is it you're using? Penny's asked that in the chat room.
They're using EEG at the moment, but I know that various bids and grants have been put in to get more. The University of Northampton itself is improving even this year its third-year neuroscience module, and I think they're trying to develop a lot of that through to master's level as well. I don't know if they're planning to do a new master's degree in neuroscience, but I know that we're due to get some new and better equipment, which means we can do even more things, but at the very least we've got very good EEG equipment that we're working with at the moment.
And again, it demonstrates that the people on the street who, are talking about the progression of the field that hasn't happened, then you really need to start talking to people at the SPR or CAL or, any of these people to show you that this work is being done. It is out there. It is being done. Just people don't slap it about on social medias. That they're quietly going away and doing the work. And that's really, really key, isn't it?
It's bizarre, isn't it? I mean, I saw... I'm very careful. I certainly read a lot of social media, but I don't engage. There's just no point. I don't find, because I've seen arguments just go on and on and on. I remember myself and Steve Parsons getting caught in an argument once with someone that had said to both of us, without fully knowing who we were, I don't think, there are no experts in the paranormal. And I thought, well, that's a bit cheeky. That's like going into the hospital and saying to the doctor treating you that there are no experts in medicine. What are you getting out of saying, though? I've got the qualifications. I focus my research on trying to understand anomalous processes and how they're characterized and how people experience them. And I'm involved in the literature. I teach it as well. So I would like to say that in terms of an expert on knowing the literature, the experiences, how to conduct the research, I would certainly say I am one in that sense. And to your other point as well, I've seen comments that parapsychologists aren't interested in field investigations. We are. It's just not many opportunities come up that are worth it. I was speaking on a podcast the other day where we're having a laugh at the fact that parapsychologists have almost been sort of kicked out of the haunting investigation scenario because of the rise of so much media and these independent ghost hunting groups. I remember maybe about 7 or 8 years ago now, contacting some well-known public property in Derbyshire where the public could go and visit day to day. And it had a reputation for its haunting experiences, and I wanted to go and do some research. So I sent a formal email from the university and got a reply saying, could I come and investigate the property? And they replied saying, absolutely, you can bring up to 12 guests. It will be £500 for blah, 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 blah. And all this money suddenly came out. And I went, what do you mean guests? I don't understand. And they said, the guests on your tour. And I said, no, read the email back. And they said, yes, we've just read the email back. You can bring this many guests. And it costs. I said, no, you're completely misunderstanding the scenario. What do you think I'm going to do? And they said, well, you're going to take groups around. I said, no, I'm not. It's just me on my own.
Myself and I.
That's it. And I'm just going to bring some cases of things, and I'd like to meet the people that work there. I'd probably like to interview you as well, and I'd just like to spend some time with the building. They were bewildered that it was just me coming from a university. They didn't get it at all, or even that there were such things as parapsychology departments. And so because of this, I remember doing a lot of haunting investigations myself, but it's just become so tricky. So, because there's been people like Dr. Alan Gould, who was at the University of Nottingham. He's a well-known parapsychologist, and he wrote about what's called the decline effect, and this idea that spontaneous phenomena, so people reporting telepathy and seeing ghosts day to day, those reports are actually going down in recent years. I don't think they are. I think it's a problem with filtration. They're being filtered off to local people, local interest groups, and they're not being reported to the Society for Psychical Research or University of Northampton, University of Derby, Nottingham Trent University, University of Edinburgh, Goldsmiths University, Greenwich University. And I could keep going with all the universities that have departments interested in this. And people don't know to do that. They're not even necessarily aware that the departments exist. So what seems like a decline effect, I think, are just going off to other people that are wanting to go and do ghost hunts. So we're not seeing as many of these cases. I get maybe 2 a year where someone comes to me seriously wanting help for a haunting. And it doesn't always follow through either, because I try to get them to keep diaries of what's going on. And they don't seem so interested in documenting their own experiences. They just want someone in to do something. And then we have to question the motives. Am I going to turn up and there's a newspaper journalist there, or, or there's a mental health problem, or what is actually going on here, and how best can I actually deal with this? I've waffled on a lot there from that original point. But
because it's very relevant, because we hear it from both sides here on Parasearch, because obviously we cover both, we cover all sorts of people in the field. And it does feel like there's a massive split in the paranormal field. You have like the ghost teams that go out, or the ghost investigators that go out as little teams and do their thing and, do generic ghost hunts that they've seen on the TV. Then you've got like the middle ground, where you've got like serious researchers as well as enjoying the ghost hunt. And then you've got like the academics like yourself. There's a massive split, but we need to bring that field together. Do you not think, to get, the data and the information we need to help progress the field and increase study material for you guys, the guys that have got the knowledge to understand what's going on more than someone like myself, I do my research, but nowhere near to the level of you guys have done. But we find that side of things just as fascinating as we do the going out on the locations. So how can we bring that field together, where we have a melting pot of all the spectrums, where we help to progress the field forward? Because it's very split at the moment, and that's not a good thing.
Well, I think the best thing to do, and it sounds simple, but it's to just meet on familiar ground. So Ashley, bless him, he joined maybe a year ago or more the Society for Psychical Research, and he really wanted to do a qualification in parapsychology, and is still considering how he might do that against his busy, home, family, social life. It's a tricky thing when you really want to be taken seriously and do it, but if you're part of an organisation where everyone's familiar with you and what you're doing, that makes everyone more comfortable in working together. Because I think Ashley has really reaped the benefits of it, because now he's volunteering himself for so many different things. He now writes a lot of the lecture reports and conference reports. So he turns up to some of the major events and he note takes a dictaphone, and he's writing up, he's listening to all these lectures, and being a member of the SPR as well. He's getting the information through to his door, the stuff that people say doesn't exist. Oh, there's no studies on that, or, that's not happening. That's never been written about. He's got full access to the library as well. So I've even seen him a few times when I've been down there, and he's rummaging through the library, and because he's got all of this information to hand. And the SPR has been made up of two different types of people that have always been well respected. And it's those that are from a variety of backgrounds that are not academics whatsoever, but are just well-read and passionate. So that, people like Maurice Grosse, who was involved in the Enfield poltergeist, he was very knowledgeable on the literature because he was just interested and read. And he was a member of the SPR for a long time. And Guy Playfair was very well respected as well. His background was in journalism. And so he was in a similar position. He just read and read and read. Your other members are from a variety of backgrounds, typically psychology, but some from psychiatry, history, biology, you name it. All the other sciences and art disciplines, they're academics of those fields, and theologians as well. Many retired people as well from different professions suddenly start to join as well and want to take it as a serious hobby from that point. But it's great meeting grounds because everyone starts to see more and more those people's names crop up as being a delegate at a conference or a lecture, and you're regularly meeting these people, and you know that they're getting access to the same information as you, and not just stuff that's being battered about the internet. It's the actual stuff that's been peer-reviewed, it's been assessed, it's been questioned, and it's going through the same standardized methods and results as other areas of social science as well. But the great thing is, because it involves a variety of scientists as well, we can start to step over into areas like physics and so forth to actually bring in that kind of perspective and take on the phenomena we're dealing with. So I think that's where our common ground is, really. Organisations like the SPR, which have been around since 1882.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there is a barrier, a social barrier, where language barrier comes into things? So like I could come along and be baffled by the way things are put because it's put in a very academic way rather than like a layman termed. That's how I find things sometimes. Once it's layman termed, I go, get it. But, sometimes someone says something and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't get that at all. And to be fair, Ashley, going back to Ashley, he's done a lot of that for me. He's gone, this is what they meant. And I go, oh, well, I get that now. Why didn't they just say that? Do you think that is almost like a barrier that needs to be crossed? So the everyday investigator that wants to learn, wants to get that knowledge and become well read, it breaks it down more for people. So it makes it more accessible to the everyday person rather than just the academics. Because when you're going through a university or an academic way, there is a specific language, big words kind of language that's used. And I get that because certain big words are big words because they literally mean that one understanding of the word.
It can summarise 2 sentences in one word sometimes.
Exactly. So I understand why you use big words, I'm not criticising that. But for the everyday person, that's quite intimidating.
Well, I think that's why it's good that, at the university, we're discouraged in a way. It probably wasn't always the case because it's good for awareness of that researcher and then also the university. So at one time, it was encouraged for us to write books and be a lecturer who has loads of books to their name. Now we're encouraged more so for this research excellence framework. That we write more papers and they go in high impact journals. So journals, they're getting a lot of subscribers from individual membership in different libraries. Just said that, look, here's this research and it's being done at this university and look how many people subscribe to that paper. Look how much of an impact it's made because of how many people it's gone out to. And that's going to be full of that kind of language that you're talking about because it's a formal research report. It has to be in the formal way. It has to be using that kind of wording as well that everyone in academia is familiar with because it's just a set protocol. That's your introduction, that's your literature review, that's the methodology, that's the results, that's the discussion. And we're ingrained to do that. And I think I have this kind of on-off switch that academics speak as well. So I'm using it in a lecture, but if there's a hand that goes up and says, that doesn't make sense to me, then I'll try and put public lecturing kind of scenario on in my mind. And I do a lot of that. I do a lot of, obviously, lecturing at the university, but then I'm asked to go and do public talks. And I realised that, I'm going to have to get rid of all these statistics and just show one number and explain what that one number means, because it will make a lot more impact and understanding than it will to show them all the sums and equations that my students will definitely understand, because that's all they're doing day in, day out. They're doing a lecture and then they're going to a computer to learn how to analyse data. So that they're learning that kind of language. So to go back to your point of how do we also stop this language barrier from people wanting to learn, I think it is good when we've got noted people in our field that are writing papers and getting that impact out there, showing, look, here's this unique piece of research, and this is why it's contributing to knowledge. This is why we need to know about this stuff. And it's been peer reviewed and so forth. So that's gone into the journal. But then they're also writing books on it and summarizing it. So classic one, Rupert Sheldrake's very good at that. He's written papers, but then he's written books that have toned down that kind of writing style that's required for the journal. It's his book. He can write any way he likes. And the editor will keep saying, Rupert, you've made it too academic. This needs to be for anyone that's just walked into Waterstones and seen the book and said, oh, that's interesting. But they want to go and read it on a coffee break. Same for Dean Radin. He's become very good at that. Yeah. And I think to some extent I've got that style right. I mean, I wrote Telephone Calls from the Dead. It was finished in 2011. And it's just a summary of what's been done and what I found from reanalyzing people's accounts. Wasn't making any kind of definite conclusions. It was just, this is what people say are happening, and these are the ideas behind why they're happening. These are the ones that have been battered around. And I've been reading so much of D. Scott Rogo's work, and he's become so good at doing publicly accessible books that I think a lot of that writing style had stuck into my head. So I was writing very much how I'd been reading. And so I got a lot of compliments on Telephone Calls from the Dead, that it was very much like D. Scott Rogo's writing style. So I thought, then I've got this balance right then, because I'm producing peer-reviewed papers, but I can tone it down and explain it in book form. I'm having to do that again right now because I've done so much on bereavement research. I'm currently writing a book on bereavement that I've been asked to do, and I'm trying to get my head back into that. I'm just picking this book up for the first time. Would I read this first page and buy it? So I've got to do that. I've got to draw someone in and say, oh, that's interesting. I want to know more. I want to learn about the research, but I don't want to be bogged down with statistics, methodology, and so forth. I want to know, what did you do? Why did you do it? And what were the outcomes?
Mm-hmm. And almost like bite-sized chunk it so people understand it better.
Yeah.
Which is so important, I find, for myself, because my education level stopped when I left school, which was O-level and CCSE back in the day. That shows you how far back I went. So I didn't go into like A-levels. I didn't go into degrees. I didn't go into PhD. So my learning stopped there, and then I went into life experience. And what I've read since then has literally been what I've picked up and read. So when I start picking up a thesis or a paper, I mean, I was reading a, believe it or not, coronial mass ejection paper the other day. Oh my God, my mind was literally melting because I was like, I kind of know-ish, kind of get the grasp of what they're getting at, but I don't really get it. And it really put me off that line of inquiry for me on something that I'm researching. And that is becoming a bit, this is where the line of divide becomes in the paranormal field and, you know, anomalous in research. This is where it becomes a divide. Whereas, as much as people from the field should be reaching out to places like the SPR and other associations, shouldn't the SPR be reaching out to the community as well?
I think it is. I mean, I'm not sure how much it could reach out to the community more than it is, because it's got a social media presence. And it does try and advertise as wide as it can its conferences that are going on. I mean, I think it would welcome suggestions from members of the public that have any ideas as to how it could kind of create an outreach beyond what it's already doing, something that they think would work. But to go back onto your other point about papers, don't think you're alone in that. I pick up so many research papers from different disciplines. I'm never just reading psychology. I'm reading all sorts of science papers that I think are interesting or of use. I think this is terrible, the way it's been written. I've had to read that same paragraph 3 or 4 times over because it doesn't make any sense to me. It's the writing style and the wording that they're using. I just think it's very poor. So you get all kinds of papers that get published and people aren't paying much attention to them sometimes just because of the way that it's written. And there's an interesting divide between Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. I always think that Carl Jung's ideas on child development were far better than Freud's, but Freud is far more noted for child development and what happens with the ID, the ego and the superego, and then all the different stages as well, because his writing style was far better. And that's why Jung kind of lesser so was known in the public, because his writing style wasn't that great for someone to just pick up the book. But academics certainly loved Jung just because they were just so ingrained in that kind of writing style as well. But it still happens to this day. Even academics will pick up papers and think, I'm really struggling with this. It's a really interesting topic. The abstract and title sounds great. but I can't get into it. I'm just really struggling. And you'll get that with day-to-day books as well. You know, when you think, oh, that's an interesting book, but I've tried the first two, I'm just not getting into it.
Mm. Well, that's true. That's true. I'm glad I'm not the only one who reads things and thinks, oh, my God. Now, you are a speaker at Sage Paracon, which is why you're actually on tonight, because this is your showcase show on it. You're at Sage Paracon this year, so you are kind of stepping more out of your normal academica. That's not even a word, but we'll go with that. Into, you know, that more environment, you know, the investigative environment. How are you feeling about that?
I don't know. My diary at the moment is just absolutely bizarre and looks worse than Spaghetti Junction at a distance. So I can't even remember how that came about, whether Ashley put my name forward or something like that, or some people did and said they'd like me to talk, and then MJ got in contact with me. And I know I've still got to do some advertising for them that they wanted. So here's at least a first bit of it. I'm happy to do public talks because I do this anyway. I'll do single ones. I know that next year I'm speaking to Nottingham Skeptics in the pub, and they're great venues as well, because there you've got a mixture of public audience and academic audiences as well. The Skeptics in the pub scenarios are great. So Sage Paracon, I'm looking forward to it. I've heard about what's happening, and it's certainly a variety of different speakers. I don't know how many I'll get to see for myself, but I certainly love to sit in on a few of the ones that I've seen advertised. Mm-hmm. So what I'm doing is literally, what's it all about? Why do the universities engage in parapsychology? What's the point of having it, and what's the point of psychology as well? So it's really a journey through how did I get into this, and what I've discovered are the pros and cons of being involved in social science. And I've learned a lot along the way. I'm certainly learning more and more with the increase of the internet that you just, trolling and all sorts. People getting too much of an interest in what you do, and people expressing their opinions when they don't know what they're talking about, and even worse, they don't even know that they don't know. Especially when they're trying to cast opinions on you. And parapsychology is the worst for getting extremist critics all over it. So, I'll bring up stuff like that and basically some of the research outcomes that we've got at the university and how it's going to help people, especially clinical parapsychology and the research that we've done with the bereaved. Mm-hmm. So that's what's in store for when I get to Sage Paracon.
Brilliant. Now, you are going to be doing an investigation while you're there as well.
Am I?
Yeah, did you not know this?
I didn't know that. Lovely.
Yeah, you're going to be out investigating with them.
Well, there we go.
So
can you tell me more?
Oh, well, I don't want to spoil it for you.
Oh.
You heard about the masquerade ball?
Oh, so that's like a Saturday night thing. See, I don't know if I'm going to be there for that. It might be the case that I'm actually dropping in on the Sunday and giving my talk, hanging around, and then I'm off again.
Oh,
I think
you're not there for the 4 days.
No. I think the way that they'd arranged the conference, I'm so booked up. 10 minutes full swing at the university. I think I'm literally just there for the day that I've been asked to go and speak. So that's why I was probably a bit out of it when it comes to investigation, because I guess they're going to do that on an evening or a night time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be there for that.
Oh, that's such a shame.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do. If I can make it, it'd be interesting to go along for that. I'll see. But as far as I was aware, I was doing the Sunday. But I'll see if I can make it. I'll find out a bit more from MJ.
I think you should. I really do think you should. I think you need to fully embrace the Sage experience rather than just turn up for your talk and then disappear.
It just depends.
But I know you're an incredibly busy person. So I just want to quickly cover your books, because you've mentioned Telephone Calls from the Dead.
Yeah.
Hugely interesting topic. The whole factor of that is incredibly fascinating. And I've listened to you do a few online seminars and stuff and pods on this very topic. Can you summarise that quickly? Because believe it or not, we've actually only got 15 minutes left to go, and I haven't even got onto paraacoustics yet.
Too many times I've spoken about Telephone Calls from the Dead, and it's become both a blessing and a curse, because out of all my writing, it's the one that's most noted and done really well. Is an independent thing as well. It wasn't like a big time publishing company. It was a very small publishing house, private one, called Tricorn Books in Portsmouth, and Old Portsmouth as well. So it's right on the tip, trying to get near to Gun Wharf and Spinnaker Tower. but lovely publishing company, and it was great to work with them and get something finally off on the road that wasn't a research paper. So it got a lot of public interest, and it was updating the original 1979 book by D. Scott Rogo and Raymond Bayliss. And I just discovered by that point, because of stuff that was happening during my undergraduate years, I'd seen news advertisements about some guy who'd allegedly phoned his family after he died in a train collision in California, and loads of conventional explanations for why that happened, and the phone being smashed and possibly ringing the last people in the call register being his wife and kids. But the media advertised it as a phone call from the dead. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because I've just bought, out of all the other D. Scott Rogo and Raymond Bayliss books I'm reading, I bought their co-authored piece, which is Phone Calls from the Dead. So after I heard about that newspaper report and it being picked up by other news companies, I thought, well, I'll go back and read this book and find out what it's all about. I thought, wow, this is fascinating. They were talking about full-blown conversations that could last up to half an hour. So I thought, well, what happened to this in parapsychology? I hear about experiences of precognition, telepathy, people seeing ghosts, poltergeist activity, not telephone activity. So I went to the journals from that point of 1979 and had to literally by hand scan through these journals that many of them haven't been turned into electronic copies. So I was sat in the library with a coffee, spending a few hours looking at every single title, every correspondence for every journal issue from that point on to present day, and found very little. I realized that the most I was going to get out of what people thought of the book was looking at the most obscure journals in parapsychology from 1979 to 82, where people had, and libraries associated with parapsychology had bought the book. So I got different academics' views on the topic just from a book review. And so that's been my most important source of reference from that point. What I did was I took some of these photos and published cases. I took more modern cases where the mobile phones had been involved, text messages and emails, and I wanted to look at what's actually changed in terms of characteristics over a 30-year period. Has much changed, or were they quite right in their analysis that these are the general phenomenology involved, these are the general characteristics, structures, the way that they actually carry out? And they were pretty much the same. There was an additional case I added in where I said some of them are a mix between two of the types that they'd mentioned. So there was simple calls that were very brief. There were prolonged calls that were up to half an hour. There were answer calls where you were the one making the telephone to call to someone you didn't realize at the time was dead or was alive but wasn't in to take the call, but they still answered it anyway. And later on, there was this complete confusion because you speak to them and say, that telephone call that we had, what telephone call? And then confusion ensues. And then intention calls where you intend to make a call and don't, but at that time, that person still receives the call from someone with your voice characteristics, knowledge, and so forth. So there's some more confusion going on there. And so that's what it was about. And then after I'd done that analysis and talked about what came out of it, it was just batting about keeping my own personal views to a side, because I don't believe I'd really got any regarding that. I was just batting about the different ideas and theories that have been placed there. There have been some critics of it that believed that, I was saying that I believed in psychokinesis and things like that. My own personal beliefs don't come into it. All I was doing was kind of batting around suggestions of what other people suggested. So it's very much like when you read some journals like the SPR journal, it says at the start, we don't endorse the views of the people within this. We have no formal view. So I felt like that as an author, really. I was interested to talk about the ideas, but it wouldn't really have helped to express my own views on the matter. I don't think that would have contributed very much to the book.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so that's basically that one, because I want to skim these, okay. Even though they deserve a lot more time, but we're running out of time. Talk to me about Paracoustics, the book you wrote on Paracoustics.
Paracoustics was an edited anthology, and it was Steve Parsons' idea. He wanted to work on several books that went down this idea of looking at auditory phenomena, because that's where he's most interested, working on infrasound, and then through to vision and other things. But infrasound was the first thing that we worked on. And we decided to combine our own interests, mine with the telephone anomalies, his with sound. So I wrote a chapter on the psychology of sound. He did one on the physics of sound, being a physicist, and very much involved in physical research. And then we looked at noises and sounds produced in the seance room. So I called that chapter Noisy Spirits. He was looking at musical and noisy ghosts, where people had apparition sightings in various locations. We called that Noisy Ghosts. some people didn't understand why we'd use those definitions to separate, but we just thought, well, spirits of the seance room and ghosts for everywhere else. It becomes clear in both of those chapters. And then we talked about infrasound. I talked about the telephone anomalies. And then beyond that, we had people that we know involved in research where they'd also stepped on the toes of sound research. So Dr. Melvin Willen was looking at musical anomalies on the deathbed. So when people are dying and they hear angelic voices singing or musical instruments being played. Anne Winsper, who's a PhD candidate at the University of Central Lancashire, she's talked about her own PhD research on the psychology of electronic voice phenomena. So she's really dealing with the most up-to-date research that's going on there. Dr. Jack Hunter, he looked at shamanic use of drumming to create altered states of consciousness. Yeah. Drumming and other musical instruments ideas. Dr. Barry Colvin, who was talking about poltergeist raps and recording them in buildings and comparing the natural day-to-day sounds of the building compared to what are allegedly these anomalous raps and responsive raps of the poltergeist. And then we had Clay Foley, who was an ex-forensic criminal investigator in Canada. He's talked a lot about spontaneous music. That's the very first stuff that D. Scott Rogo was writing about. Those are his first books. He wrote that when he was an undergraduate. And Clay Foley is quite a fan of D. Scott Rogo's work. So he took that forward and spoke about spontaneous music in day to day.
Wow.
That's it. I know it's quite. And it's just a handbook, really. I mean, if anyone's a field investigator, they go out and they investigate ghosts and haunted properties and things like that. It's not a book to pick up and read through. I wouldn't even recommend that. It's one of those where, if you've got it at the side of the bed, look at the chapter index and scroll your finger down and think, oh, I'll read that chapter tonight. Mm-hmm. And because it's one of the starting ones, like Some Noisy Ghosts or Some Noisy Spirits.
So or if you're experienced rapping, then you'd go, oh, we had that tonight on an investigation. Oh, let me have a read of that bit.
Absolutely. And then, you've been watching a documentary on, shamanic traditions, and you think, oh, it'd be interesting to read Dr. Jack Hunter's on how the music that they use might invoke spirits or psychic phenomena happening, or how they believe that's happening. So I'll read his chapter tonight. There could be something going on day to day in your research or just general interest, and you think, I want to know a bit more. I know that book will have something on it. Mm-hmm. So it's a really good field manual. And I know Steve's other book, Ghostology, is acted like that as well in terms of a kind of a ghost hunter's handbook. And most recently, he's updated the field manual for spontaneous case investigation for the SPR. I think that's just gone on sale now.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So, guys, these books are kind of ones you're going to need in your bookcase, is all I'm saying on that one. They're great books to reference to. If you've got something going on that you want to have a look into a bit more, these are the kind of books you're going to need and want, because they're written by people that have done the serious research that's behind it. So I recommend those completely. Okay, so Cal, what's next for you? Because you're so busy all the time. Pinning you down is a nightmare. So what is next for you at the moment? What is it that you're passionate about right now?
As Steve Parsons says, I'm as slippery as a greased weasel. It's just hard to get off of it. And that does remind me, I need to get back to him. I was meant to call him over a week ago, so that's just reminded me. I know, terrible. I will get back to him. Steve, if you're listening, I'll get back to you.
I went, make sure it's in your diary. He was like, yeah, okay, miss.
I'm terrible.
What are you passionate about right this moment? What is your passion that's fulfilling your soul?
Loads of things. The conferences are all coming up. We've just moved campus. University of Northampton's gone from Park campus to Waterside, so that's a new big move that we're just preparing for. Parapsychology module's been updated, so great. We've brought in a couple of new lectures on reincarnation experiences, skepticism and belief, and we're going to talk about that. So the students have got a lot more to deal with this next year and some online interactive activity. So that's made some interesting progression at the university. Loads of research going on and research papers that I'm working on regarding the flotation tanks, a survival belief questionnaire we had validated. That was work I did with Northumbria University at Newcastle that's coming out. I'm doing some more papers on bereavement research and mediumship and some on positive psychology as well. But for the stuff that's definitely in the public domain, Alex Tanous' latest book that I've been editing for ages should be finished soon. I should have a complete manuscript that's called Psi in Psychotherapy, about using his alleged abilities to diagnose people with the help of a psychotherapist and a psychiatrist there who wrote the book with him. And in that process, they, administered a course of treatment, sometimes even medication for that person that received a psychic diagnosis. So they were cutting out the process using a psychic to just, Dr. Alex Tanous, to just talk about what their original roots of their problem was. And that person had to either confirm or dismiss whether what he was saying was correct or not. And in these 9 or so case studies that are in the book, these people are absolutely shocked that with Alex just sitting with them, he was absolutely spot on with the information that was coming out regarding why they got that problem in the first place. So something that could never happen to this day, it was kind of a very unique thing happening in the 1980s that he wrote up as a full manuscript, and it just never got published. So we've provided an extended introduction, myself and Dr. Stanley Krippner of Saybrook University, to explain where clinical parapsychology is today and why we wouldn't do this. We're more so interested in, as a parapsychologist, how do I help someone that has had a disturbing anomalous experience or an experience during bereavement? How will it benefit them? How can we help them? We're not interested in the phenomena. How has the phenomena helped them? And then in turn, how can we help them know more about their own health and the experiences? And there's also Dr. Adrian Parker at the University of Gothenburg as a clinical psychologist. He's written the afterword to explain his insight of what he's kind of gained from reading about this psychotherapy process that Tanous was involved in. So that's one book that should be out, and I've just started on my other book regarding bereavement and these experiences. That's kind of taking my original PhD and turning it into a less academic piece and making it more of public interest. What did I do? Why did I do it? What's bereavement actually about? Why do we grieve? And then maybe why do we have strange experiences during bereavement as well? And regardless of their ontology, where they come from, why they happen, what benefit do they have to us for having them? Because it seems the majority of people in bereavement have them. So why do we have them and what are the outcomes? And I'm mainly talking towards the end of that about all the positive psychology within them and how we can use these positive attributes to our own advantage to help ourselves heal and recover and cope. So that's been a book in the long time running, and my publishers have been just scratching at me like mad to actually sit down, focus, get writing, stop doing other things. And I'm finally sitting down and working on that at the moment. So those are the main two or three things that I can tell you at the moment that are springing to mind.
Wow, is all I can say. Oh my goodness. And you have a life as well. Oh
yes, I have a life here and there. It's mixed in
I do wonder.
Between the gaps, I can see the light.
Yeah, the odd beer now and again.
I'd say that I just had my nighttime cap of a glass of rum, so that's been me.
Oh, rum. Don't talk to me about rum. Oh,
rum.
Dear.
Oh, rum.
I love a bit of rum. Anyway, we are actually coming to the end of the show. Thank you so much for joining me. I will definitely have you back on again when we can squeeze me into your busy schedule, I'm sure.
Good Lord, that will be fun. Yes, please do.
Because I still want to talk to you. I want to focus the next show I do with you on positive psychology.
That'd be great.
Because that's a side of you we haven't really heard about, and that's quite a big part of what you've started from, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's strange, really, when I see reviews or things that people have written on me, and they've only gone off of internet references, and this is another one of my pet hates for the internet. It's shown such poor research in many ways because, admittedly, I started out with parapsychology, but that only seems to be people's focal points. When you actually look at some of my writing or speak to the people that I work with or see what I'm engaged in at the university, a lot of my main emphasis and work at the moment is the domain of positive psychology and also thanatology dealing with bereavement. Mm-hmm. So I'm not at the moment, besides the flotation team, actually testing the psi, which is what you'd expect of a parapsychologist. I'm dabbling with so many other things as well that, it's important to do that because it shows all the ways that different connect. Mm-hmm. So it would be great to talk about positive psychology, positive attributes, and how we can understand more about emotions. And if we know more about them, we can make our own lives better.
Yes, definitely. And that is definitely something I would love to talk to you about. We've been very focused before we talked about the bereavement side of things. And that was the one before Christmas, wasn't it? And then we talked today was really catching up with what you've been doing in the Sage Paracon side of things. So I would love to have you back on to talk about the positive psychology because I think you give a very unique perspective on that side of things, particularly as I've been talking to a lot of life coaches recently and law of attraction and stuff like that, because it all comes into positivity and changing your mindsets and stuff. So hearing it from a psychologist will give it a different perspective too. So that would be awesome.
Wunderbar.
Guys, if you miss any of our shows, you can check us out on our YouTube channel. Don't forget, go over there, click like, share and subscribe. Tomorrow evening, you've got the Supernatural show with Joe and Gemma. They have got the paranormal detectives in the studio talking to you all about what they've been up to. And on that note, I bid you all a very good night. Thank you so much, Kel, for joining me once again.
Thank you, Kerry. Been a pleasure.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.